What's going on, Shield Brothers and Shield Maidens? I'm True,
And I'm Fry.
and today we're going to sit down with Fry in our new series that we are going to call Integrity of the Shield, where we sit down with each member of the Shield's Rest team and talk about leadership and GM tips, and so you can gain their vast experience between both being a GM and being a leader within the military. So let's get into it. All right, Fry, so let's start off with how are you as a GM now by comparison to when you first started, and what has kind of been the journey that you've experienced through that?
Right. Yeah. So I mean, it's really night and day, right? And I think everyone has this at their first table. Is I essentially let them run the show. When I first started, I was very much a yes and DM, which isn't a bad thing, but I would rarely not let them do what they wanted to do, in
Right.
spite of maybe the rules we were in, which fun in the moment, but quickly spirals into something uncontrollable. Whereas now I'm very still try to let them have their fun, but I definitely corral them and make sure they are staying within the rule set, because while it's fun to branch out, the rules are there for a reason, right? It's to
Right.
make sure everyone's having a fun experience at the same time and no one's going off uh, into the nether, so to speak. So I guess I would say I used to let them run me, but now I make sure I run the table instead.
Hell yeah. Well, and it's to be honestly, sorry, to be fair, the rules are there for a reason. Like we're playing make believe right now, but the rules are there so that way we all play the same game and no one's getting anything over anybody else at this point, especially from the player experience, which is really what the rules are there for, is to have a good player experience across the board and not just for one individual, because this is after all a team game and not just a one person sort of situation. So yeah, I like that. So then in those moments, where do you feel like you were lacking from a leadership perspective in terms of how you could have been a better GM when you first started?
I think it was willing to pull the player aside after the fact, right? You don't want to like jump at them across the table, but it was more so pulling them aside to reinforce expectations and to set expectations. So on that first game, I really didn't set anything, because in my mind I wanted to be like, oh, this is going to be a surprise. I don't want to spoil anything, and it backfired in the sense that I wasn't able to sit there and tell them, hey, this is the kind of campaign we're going to run, or this is the kind of game it is. um, and it came to a head in the sense that one of the players I had, they thought this was going to be an open world sandbox, I go wherever I want kind of game. When in
Yeah.
reality, this is a campaign book with a set story, and you not following the path. And I didn't have enough skills as a GM at the time to like basically corral them in the right direction without holding their hand, so to speak. So
Right.
that was the skill that, like, I have that now. I'm pretty good at it now. Um, but that was the skill that I like needed the most, was to not be afraid to sit down and tell them like, hey, I think we're both off on expectations.
Well, and setting expectations is good. That's why the zero session is so important to do first and foremost, is to set those ground rules, whether that is from the rules perspective, how you are as a GM, what the player's looking for exactly. So that way they don't get into something that they don't want to be a part of. And that way they don't expect anything from you that you're not really willing to give or that you're not willing to put into this. Because especially first starting out, a campaign book, it's got the rails for a reason and it's supposed to get you through that as a GM to help, get you into the storytelling sort of mode. And then you can eventually get those skills later. And setting those expectations early on is extremely helpful. So yeah, that is one major pitfall I think a lot of GMs run into, and it's hard to rectify until you have that discussion to be like, hey, look, this is where I'm at, and I'm not there yet, and I know what you're looking for, but I can't help you there yet. So hopefully that person either says, you know what, okay, I see where you're going with this, or you know what, maybe this isn't for me. And then you can at least have that real conversation, which is what a lot of this boils down to, right? Like this is just about real conversations with people. So no one is thinking the wrong thing. But yeah, love that. So then from that side of things, did you ever experience times where you just were coming in with the wrong mindset to a game where you're just either something from work was bothering you, something from home is bothering you, something that somebody has said, maybe anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I've had an in-game moment where I don't think the player intended it, but they gave to the effect of that like they weren't having a good time, which I think
Hmm.
as a GM like strikes you like right here because like that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to make sure everyone's having fun. And they didn't flat out say this isn't good, but I could like just tell by the look on their face, like they tried to do something and it like didn't play out and like I didn't make a right call looking back on it and it just like
Yeah.
and it was like halfway through the session. So now it's like how do I recover from this for the next like hour? And yeah, that one was rough. That one was rough.
Yeah, that sounds a bit like a between an ownership issue as well as an ego issue between both individuals at that point because you got to subordinate your ego in those moments and really realize that you know what, okay, what are they saying to me right now? They're not having fun. Okay, what exactly is that? And then if it was because of the bad call, it's when you just have to own up to it and be like, you know what, you're right, that was a bad call, and that's my bad. But this is how we'll go about it going forward. Now that I know what the rules are for this, or you know what, in those situations, maybe we'll run it a little bit differently just to have a little bit more fun with it. So if somebody is looking for a rules light version, you kind of know that going forward, or vice versa. If they want a little bit more strict rules, you now know that going forward as well. So yeah, that has happened way too many times. I've had that happen as well with one individual in particular where I brought in a friend of a friend basically. Like these two weren't friends, but they knew me basically. And so one of them was super like funny, just carefree, doesn't care about the rules, just gonna do what he's gonna do. The other one is all about the rules, and to have them two at the same table was a bad mixture. And the one who loved the rules ended up leaving by the end of it because I'm more of a let's just kind of go with the flow here. Let's have a little bit of fun with it. But he was definitely not about that. So one time he just got up, left, and said he wasn't having any fun, and gone. I was like, okay. That's how I knew poor leadership was coming into play from my side. And unfortunately, I didn't know how to rectify that in the moment. But looking back on it, now it's like, okay, I know what to do before that even becomes an issue because of this. So, yeah. All right,
Yeah.
so then getting into a little bit more specifically about the video that we just did here, the four pillars. I know you've been hearing that for like ever,
Years.
because years, yeah. Like how long has it been for you at this point? What, 10 plus years
12.
now as well? 12.
12. Yeah.
It's and I haven't heard that briefing come up in a little bit. They haven't been harping on it as much, the four pillars, but that used to be like a yearly thing you'd have to hear about. So, and I kind of miss it a little bit now that I'm thinking about it. It was actually kind of helpful, but I never cared at the time. I don't know about you. What did you think of the four pillars when you first heard it?
So when I first heard, I mean, I was like 19, 20, so you couldn't tell me anything. But uh, I think it was just a lack of like, it was a lot of people say, yeah, these are your four pillars. Work on them. Have a good day. And so I don't
Yeah.
think a lot of people took the time to explain what it means. Especially like you kind of said in your video, the spiritual pillar. Like a lot of people just be like, "Yep, that's just pick faith and run with it." And it's like that's not really what it is. So I think it was just a lot
Yeah.
of like poor execution. So it turns a lot of people off of the idea of having them.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think they just don't explain it super well because they just give it to somebody that doesn't fully care and they're just doing it for a bullet kind of moment. But when you
Yeah,
have somebody that actually knows it and understands it, lives it or whatever, can explain it to you in a proper way, it starts to hit a lot differently than somebody that's just kind of doing it because they were either told to do it or they just wanted to mark something off for their EPR. So
yeah,
when I had a mental health provider actually talk about it, I was like, oh, okay, because she elaborated even further into those pillars as to like what exactly constitutes what for each pillar. Because the spiritual side, like you said, they gloss over it all the time, and I'm like, guys, this is actually a really important side of it. But it took me being completely devoid of that kind of thing to actually get there. So for the spiritual pillar, we'll start off with that because why not? It's a good place as any. What exactly is that for you, and how did you finally come to the discovery of what it is?
so I think for me, it's a belief in a principle, right? How you connect to the world around you, right? So for me, I'm not full blown into it. I like the teachings of kind of like Buddhism is what I
Yeah.
loosely follow is the closest I would say it, but it's really just the kind of the principles within it, right? So it's just reflecting on myself, reflecting on like the world around me and how those two things interact. So I don't go to um, church, monastery, anything like that. I don't do any kind of like
Yeah.
organized thing. It's all just me, and like even me and my wife, we don't necessarily have the same beliefs when it comes to that side, but it doesn't stop us from talking about them and engaging in them. And I think it's just finding what gives you your inner peace, whether that is an organized religion, whether that's just a set of beliefs, or whether
Yeah.
it's just kind of like a self-realization of like I don't believe in anything, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And so it's going to be different for everyone. It's going to be personal for everyone. And for me, it's really just that. It's like, how do I relate to the world? How does it relate to me? And I like kind of just sit, reflect, meditate on that, and that's what I use to kind of ground myself.
I like that. Yeah, I would say that typically you got to find something that's gonna center you and make you feel at peace with the world, and whatever that is, that's your spiritual pillar right there. Even if that is organized and you're going to a church every Sunday or whatever, or if it's something that you practice in your own home. Like I never realized Norse paganism was going to be something I'd get into, but I don't do it with anybody. It's just within my own home, or when I go out in nature and I just think on some of those stories and some of the tenets of that particular belief. Um, but it is something that is very personal for sure. So that how do you deal with that when it comes to your wife? Like, has there ever been any of those issues come up where you're trying to do that sort of side of things? You're trying to get into that spiritual side for you, but it's just not jiving with her. Was it ever weird at any point? Like, at what point did you guys finally feel comfortable discussing it even?
Um, I I've been very lucky with a great partner. She's been very like open. Honestly, I didn't really have any sort of belief system when we first got together, so it's really something I kind of like discovered and made part of my life along the way. Um,
Nice.
like I said, I don't really make it too big or flashy. When I have my moments, they're usually to myself, 5 minutes. Um, and so we don't share it in that aspect, but we do discuss and talk about it, and she's always been very open, and vice versa. And then, as we had our first child and another one on the way is discussing, hey, how do we introduce it to them? And we're both very open. It'll probably come to a point where we just both share what we believe in and kind of let them decide for themselves. We're not um, trying to indoctrinate them into a specific mindset or anything like that. It's
Yeah,
just, I'm very lucky. I have a great partner who we're very open both ways.
that is very rare. Glad to hear that. So then, with that, that kind of leads us. I guess we're kind of going backwards from the video here. That kind of leads us into the social aspect then, because social affects not only the relationships that you have like with your spouse, but also at work and of course at the game table. What is it for you that kind of fulfills that social pillar?
I mean, I think the game itself does, right? It's
Yeah,
that's usually my we try to set a time, once a week, each of us, to where we do the thing that makes us kind of relax, escape, um, kind of round us back out, bring us back together. For me, that's D&D or whichever game we're playing at the time. We have our game that we play online, and I run a Curses Fraud game in person as well. So every weekend I have some kind of game running, and that is enough for me to recharge because I'm actually very introverted by nature. So that 4 hours is enough for me to like, all right, I got my thing, and now I'm ready to recharge for the next week. Um, so yeah, that is my social pillar is the game table itself.
nice. What would be considered exhausting for you when it comes to the social side of things? Because like for me, large groups and like when I'm dealing with folks at work, that's exhausting and generally drains me. And oddly enough, having one-on-one conversations and doing the game table type stuff, actually being a part of these games, recharges that. Even though they're both social, for whatever reason, the work side and like random interactions just drains my social currency. Whereas for whatever reason, the other side of that just builds me up. What would that be for you? That kind of drains you a little.
So I mean, I work in patient care all day, so that part can be draining.
Yeah.
Um, Not that I dislike or hate it. It's just, you're talking to 15, 20 strangers a day. And I think that's what the difference is. I'm talking to strangers all day. That's draining because I'm having to it's those micro little, I gotta quickly learn like what you're about, what's your vibe, how do we communicate with each other, and okay, cool, I'll see you in a year. Um, Whereas, coming to the game table with friends that I've known for, however many days, week, month, and I already know how to interact with them, so I'm not having to play that game of like kind of footsies of like how are we gonna interact with each other. I already know coming to play the game, we're coming to relax, share
Right.
stories, and all that stuff. So I think that the draining is it's with strangers. I'm not a big crowds person either. I think my first like mini panic attack I remember was like trying to solo Black Friday shop. And I think I walked into a store and like I think I made it maybe 10 feet in and tunnel vision and I had to get out. So I'm not a crowds person by any means. So I think that anything to do with like strangers and big crowds, that's what drains me the most.
That's fair. Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's one of those things that you kind of have to get used to and realize what is exactly going to be for you. Because some people are happy talking to total strangers constantly, and bully for you, I think that's fantastic. I just could never do that. But I have found that it isn't that I just want like alone time a little bit, but the social side is very important because without the social side, I apparently get too prickly of a person, and that just affects my relationships in general. And so my wife is like, you clearly need to talk to people at least at some point in your day, because holy hell, I can't deal with this. So yeah, I think you kind of have to find that balance, and when you do, it's so nice when you have that. But I feel like you kind of have to balance it out with the right mental focus, the things that you can do by yourself that allow you to have those more quality interactions that you absolutely need. Because the theme that we're going to be seeing throughout this entire thing is that each pillar affects each other. And so without one, you're kind of losing the rest. So, from the mental aspect, for the mental pillar, what is it that you do in your off time to kind of take care of that?
Um, I think this goes for a lot of people. It's always the one I struggle the most with. I think as I get older, I realize that I was neglecting that side. Um, but now it's more the self actualization of it that it is something I need to focus on. So for me, it's right now it's been audiobooks. It's a chance to just kind of like dive into something else, and it gives me a chance to, alone to like kind of just sort through my mental problems or like things that have been on my mind or bugging me um while like just listening to something else. I don't know, it's probably going to be different for everyone, definitely going to be different for everybody, but it's just finding something that helps you sort through that. I've seen mental health providers as well, and they're a great resource, and they have taught me like little tips and tricks of like I've gotten into a little bit of meditation. I mean, I do it with my spiritual side as well, but whereas that's like how do I relate to the world, and that the other one is like what's going on in my head
Yeah.
that's bother me. Do I need to let it out? Do I want to keep it in? So I think and it's something I work on every day. I think that's definitely my weakest pillar by far. Um, and I'd be lying if I said yeah I nailed it. Mental health, perfect, great all the time. Um, but for me, yeah, it's just finding those like kind of moments of not necessarily silence, but silence from the world where I can just kind of like sit to myself, recharge, re-energize, and it gives me a chance to reflect on. I think acknowledging what's bothering me is usually the biggest step for me. Once I have that and I can see it and I can formulate it, I know how to handle it. But more, it's like, why do I feel off today? What interaction was it, or what did someone say, someone do, or did I say and do that like got me? Um, Sometimes you just bury it in the moment and it just gnaws at you and you don't know what it was until like a week later when you're like, oh, that was the thing that got me.
Yeah, yeah. And that's what I find interesting about trying to perfect maintain that balance with the four pillars and try and perfect them if you can. It's really that you learn that it's not that you're ever going to be able to perfect it. It's that you're just going to be able to get onto the road to redemption for a lot of these things, especially from the mental health side. The sheer fact that you're able to identify those issues is the key to being able to deal with them. Because if you don't know they're there, you're really not going to be able to deal with them. But on top of that, you can't even get on the road to redemption with that if you don't start doing a little introspection and trying to figure out, okay, what is it that's been bothering me? What's been an issue for me? And how do I fix this? Um, and mental health is a hard one. And I have found that things that you wouldn't consider to be mental health, like writing or really and truly going for a walk, or doing
Oh yeah.
meditation or breathing exercises and stuff actually does help the mental health side. But because this is kind of it's a, I don't know why it's just, but it's such an important pillar here. But there's another side to this, and that's how do you challenge your mind? How do you improve your mind? Because you kind of have to maintain that balance between not only are you working on it, but are you improving it? Are you creating those other neural pathways? And so, how do you challenge your mind? Whether that's a Sudoku or language or whatever, what is it for you?
Um, One is writing and creating. Well, I do follow like the campaign of the book. I like to write my own stories, create my own worlds and stuff.
Yeah.
Um, so trying to like challenging myself to come up with something unique. Everything has probably been written once in the world, but it's more so like can I spin it in my own way. Um, but also, I am in school working on a degree, so I mean that by
There you
itself
go.
is going to challenge me mentally. Um, Play video games in a sense. I try not to do it too much, because I don't
Yeah.
want to sit in front of the TV all day. But there are some strategy games and stuff like that. Um, so I guess like a virtual puzzle, if you will.
Yeah.
But just finding those little things, um, and then like I said, reading audiobooks. Try to keep those different. I try to dive into different genres as well. Fantasy's big one, of course, but I try to
Of
do a
course.
little sci-fi, do a little comedy and stuff like that, just to just keep it different and keep my mind, exposed to new ideas.
Nice. I love that. Well, because the mental always affects the physical, and I found that to be very interesting that once I improved on my mental side, my physicality actually got a lot better, and then vice versa. What do you do for your physical?
I go to the gym every day during lunch. I'll try to miss some days here and there, but I
Happens.
sacrifice a little bit of lunchtime. I'll just scarf the food down because that's not a problem with me, and I'll go to the gym on that time.
Nice.
Um, and then slowly getting back into running. Had some back problems, but got that mostly cleared up now. So hopefully can start doing that again. Because I used to be my favorite one when I was younger. I could hit my stride. They say mine's around like 2 miles, and after that, I can like coast forever.
Yeah.
Um, Hoping to get back into that distance, but
Hell yeah. Get those 5 mile Fridays.
yeah, one day.
We had that deployed and I loved it. We had like a whole group and everything. I didn't want to do it otherwise, but because there was a group, all of a sudden I just started doing it and felt amazing. I hated every moment of it, but once you get done with it, it just feels so good. And I think
Hmm.
that's another thing that I like about challenging my mind in that aspect is forcing myself into doing things that require a lot of willpower that I don't want to do. And physicality tends to be that for me, is I don't really care enough to work out and I don't really care enough to go run, but I know I should, I know I need to, so forcing myself to do it kind of hits both at the exact same time. So I do love that. So then from a nutritional aspect, what exactly do you get into? Do you follow a particular diet plan, or is this like one of those areas that's an issue for you, or is this something that you feel like you've got a good balanced medium for and don't really experience any problems?
Definitely had a big issue with it, and not perfect now, but I mean, between my wife is a nurse who used to work night shift. I used to be an aircraft mechanic who also worked night shift. A lot of fast food, a lot of prepackaged. Um, Caught me about 25, 27, and that's when I realized it was getting bad.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
so now I don't follow anything strict. We try to just go less sugar, um, cooking a lot more. We try to eat out once a week tops. We cut
yeah,
that back a lot, and we both notice a lot of improvements. Me especially. It kind of coincided with the gym more. It's usually how it goes. So I haven't lost too much weight, but I can just notice like a change in like the way I look and all that stuff. So it's definitely seen a much better improvement, and always working on it. So and it's
well, and
helped a
probably
lot.
in the way you feel too, right?
Yeah, like physically, I feel better. I can go longer at the gym, harder at the gym.
Oh yeah,
Mentally, I'm not as tired anymore. I used to like kind of struggle through the day. I had to like constantly be energy drink. Um, Swap that out
yeah,
with water. I wasn't drinking enough water, and now I'm like a lot better at it, and that helps a lot. So
oh
it's
yeah.
night and day. What like a just not even like a diet plan, but just like making the effort to make sure you're just treating yourself right goes a long way.
Hell yeah. Well, then, outside of the things that we just talked about within the pillars, Is there anything else that you feel like you've been working on that you know you need to get better with, that you've kind of got on the road to redemption, even though you're not quite there yet in terms of completing those particular things, whether that is something that relates to the mental or addiction based? Because like energy drinks used to be my main thing addiction wise. If I could call it an addiction, I would. But that's one of those things you kind of have to work on a little bit and taper back if you can. Is there anything else that we haven't quite discussed that you're like, you know what, this is what I've also been working on, and my God, has it helped?
Yeah. I mean, I think mental health and diet are like those are the two things that for me personally I've always struggled with.
Yeah,
Getting a lot better at them. I think outside of what we talked about, and it falls into that social pillar is always working on my relationship with my family. We have toddler now, one on the way. A lot of our attention goes to the kids, so I know what we're working on is make sure we have that time for each other as well. So I
yeah,
think that is probably the biggest thing going forward is making sure I maintain good family balance within the family itself, making sure I'm giving that good time and attention to not only my children but my wife as well. And so I think that is what's always going to be on the forefront of my mind, making sure that is um, moving forward.
nice. Now, how does that help you when it comes to being a GM? Having all of these four areas taken care of at least to some degree.
Right. So you got the physical one, you look good, you feel good, you act good, right? So I think taking care of yourself gives you that kind of like m- mental boost to like kind of carry forward and have a good attitude. My spiritual, my mental, those intertwine kind of center me and give me the confidence, so to speak, to take confrontation head on. That's how I would say
Yeah,
it. So I'm not like worried at the table of, oh, I don't know if I should say this. Maybe they won't like it or blah, blah. No, like I'm confident within like myself now because all these pillars are balanced out. That I can be like, hey, this is what it is. Here's my side. What's your side? Great. Can we meet in the middle? No, then maybe. And that's like I think the hardest conversation to have, and that's why like being
yeah.
confident in yourself with these pillars is the biggest because not every person is made for every table, and it takes working on yourself and getting yourself to the point where you can be like, hey, maybe this isn't the table for you. We can still be friends. We can maybe play at a different table with a different set with a different game. Um, but I think that's the big thing working on all these things is works too is making yourself the leader that can not only handle confrontation, sort out problems, lead people through not only a game but just like a social group, but to also recognize that hey, just because we're great friends doesn't mean we play well together, if that makes sense. And it's being able to have that conversation. Like that is a conversation I should have had with that player at that first game I ever GM'd because it was what it boiled down to was like they wanted very rules light. They want a very open world. And me as a GM, I am very rules tight. I like the rules. The rules is what makes it the game. If there are no rules, we're not playing a game. Um, Nothing wrong with either way. But I am. I'm very rule strict, and that could have saved us a lot of pain of being like, hey, this isn't the game for you, or oh, hey, the game I was going to run doesn't really mesh for that, but I'm open to it, so let's talk and figure a different game out.
Well, and that's good. As long as you know that you are kind of a rules tight individual, that at least helps you communicate with your team about that, being like, hey, look, I'm very much so about the rules, and that way they can make those decisions earlier on whether they want to be in that or not. Me, I used to be super rules tight, like by the book. I was the rules lawyer for most of the games, typically, and especially as a GM, that can kind of suck for some people sometimes. But nowadays, I just kind of go with like, okay, what's the group what like, and do they want to get into that sort of like level of rules play, or do they want to be a little bit looser with it? And then I just try to meet them in the middle on that one. Try to keep some semblance of at least a scaffolding of sorts, if not actual structure, and then we kind of feel out where everything goes. But yeah, I think that comes down to making sure that you yourself are not the issue, that you yourself are not bringing in problems that you don't need to bring into the table, because really and truly it's supposed to be one of those things where you relax at the table, you can enjoy yourselves. It should be about the game, it should be about the story and the characters that the players are playing as. It shouldn't be really about the issues that you have, whether that's from a financial aspect or a relationship aspect or even work. And though sometimes it's hard to get away from work, especially if you work with everybody, that can get real interesting. Speaking of which, actually, do you, besides our game, obviously, do you work with any, but like the players that you play with, are they people that you work with? If I could spit this out.
So two of them I did meet through work. They work in the dental clinic. One of them is a dentist there currently, and the other one, she has moved on to a different clinic. So I
Okay.
currently only work with one, but I've worked with two of them, um, but not directly. So we're separated enough job wise to where we don't interact in a work relationship too much. So
Yeah.
that, but I have obviously worked with you all, played at the table in person.
Yeah.
Um, and I know it can be, especially for you, we had people who were directly in your clinic working with you, and I'm sure that presented its own challenges when it came up. But
Yeah, that always gets really interesting real quick. But when you can separate that out and realize that at the end of the day you do work together, especially if it is people that you do work with, you kind of have to prioritize certain things first. I would say
yeah,
um, the game is fine, but at the end of the day, it is just a game. So,
yeah.
are you willing to ruin work relationships to for the game, and just because you have a particular principle with that? So I feel like once you essentially understand how to prioritize, and then you can kind of execute on what exactly you need to. But yeah, I'm hoping people start to see why the four pillars are such a necessary thing to understand, and even if it is incorporation in a small ways, if you keep that up, eventually you're going to see those benefits. What would be a bit of advice that you would give on the four pillars and how somebody should start out in it?
It's really just kind of like at a basic level recognizing what they mean to you, right? If you can say, hey, this is how I can build myself spiritually, internally. Hey, do I need to talk to someone for my mental health, or is it something I can just write down, or is it something that I can just internalize? Right? It's going to look different for everyone.
Right.
What gets me motivated physically? Is it lifting weights? Is it running? Is it going on a walk? Right? Everybody has a
Yeah.
different thing. And then socially, what do I need to charge myself, and what do I know is going to drain me? Right. So if I know I'm playing an in-person game Sunday, I probably don't want to plan a big draining event the Saturday before. And I think that's my takeaway from the pillars. It's recognizing just things about yourself and what you need to do to take care of yourself. It's not this big grand gesture that you need to like build up to something that it's not. It's just what do you need to make yourself feel good and take care of yourself.
Yeah, it is very simple. It's very intuitive. You just have to internalize, okay, what exactly does this mean to me? And am I even doing any of these things? Am I taking care of this stuff? And it's really just to help self identify some of those problem areas. So hopefully you can start working on that and get a very solid baseline together for those areas if you can, and then keep building up from there. Because I think once you get that baseline down, you only have to go up from here, and it feels so good on a daily basis. So yeah, absolutely love that.
As far as like bringing it all to the table, it,
Yeah,
it's it's recognizing those things about yourself so that you can set expectations for yourself and for the table, right?
yeah,
It's knowing what your limits are, what you need to do at the table, and it's also recognizing, you know, your friends and the people at your table, kind of recognizing when they're off as well. And you might end up being the one that says, when I was like, hey, is everything okay? I noticed you were off today. And
yeah,
then they kind of vent to you, and you're like, oh, maybe you notice a pillar that they're lacking just based on what they're saying to you. Like, hey, are you finding your outlet? Are you going to the gym? Are you running? How's everything at home? And then you start asking these questions, and you'll finally get oh, no, I don't do that. Well, here's what I do. Maybe you can jumpstart something for them. So you recognize these things in yourself, so that you can recognize the lack of it in others. And I think that's what like kind of makes you not only a leader at the table, but just like a leader in general is
absolutely.
recognizing where the people around you are kind of lacking.
Well, and that's a great opportunity to then say, well, do you want to join me? Like, especially if it's something like hey, they want to go to the gym and they just haven't been able to do it and they just need somebody to get them started, maybe that's your opportunity to be like, yo, I go to the gym. Come on, you're joining me at 5:30. Let's go. Or whatever time it is that you end up going. Like that's your time to really get them involved with you. And I think that's going to lead into what the next video is going to be here for this particular series, which is building trust and relationships with your players, with your team. So that way you can hopefully have a more secure sort of environment between everybody and everybody feels that sort of safety in that. And I think it does start with you not having issues, or at least your issues are on that road to redemption, and that you can at least recognize those issues within somebody else, so that way you can actually care about somebody. Because if you don't recognize the issues, it's hard to care about somebody at that point. Even though you say that you do, it's hard to show that you do, especially when they do start taking that turn where maybe they're dealing with family and they dislike their family, or whatever the case is. You should be able to start recognizing it, like you were saying. So yeah, I love that. Well, all right, y'all. If you liked the video, hit the like button. And if you have any questions, anything that you want to discuss, throw them down in the comments for us. We will be there in no time flat to discuss all of this. Because let's face it, if it's new for you, it's going to be a little confusing. So let us know down below. And if you are new to the channel, consider subscribing. This is part of the content that we're going to start bringing to the channel on top of Daggerheart, on top of DC20, and everything else we're getting into, especially with the one-shots that Frey's doing and systems that I haven't even heard of, and I absolutely am loving the prospect of. So, and until the next one, keep that shield wall strong.
Take care.